Dagon is a faithful adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work, focused on story and atmosphere. You will not find difficult choices, action sequences, or inventory management here. The movement is limited to progress throughout locations
I
along
am
the
writing
plot.
this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall...
You know more during this game. You will encounter interactive elements that will allow you to continue on your journey, others revealing interesting facts about the original short story, historical background, and the author. Some of this trivia is hidden, and in order to find these secrets, you need to focus and look for the Eldridge 9. You can also access these facts later. Found one! Lovecraft letter. As to letters, my case is particular. I write such things exactly as easily and as rapidly as I would utter the same topics in conversation. Indeed, epistolatorily, I believe, expressions is with me largely replacing conversation as my condition of nervous procrastination becomes more and more acute. I cannot bear to talk much now, and am becoming as silent as a specter itself. My liquidity extends itself on paper. H.P. Lovecraft. Throughout his life, penned letters, would often skip meals to afford postage. We have that one there. Anything else? Guess it's just this.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
Morphine entered into his use in the 19th century and was routinely admitted to treat severe pain during the American Civil War, World War I. It was also sold without restrictions until the 1914s. Morphine has been popular after the invention of a hypodermic syringe after around 1854. Frederick Sturthuner, whose first isolated substance, named it morphine after the Morpheus, the Greek associated with dreams. At this time, when Dagon was published, morphine abuse, known as soldier's disease, already posed a big problem in the States. That was that.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
Oh. Dagon was written around a month after the United States entered World War I. Lovecraft was actively interested in the course. He composed many poems in which he gave encouragement to the soldiers and commented on the events enlisting in Europe, holding in Europe. He tried to enlist in the army, which he mentioned in one of his letters to Reinhard Kleiner.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
The Huns were Central Asian nomads who established a domination in Europe and invaded the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. They were known as brutal, deadly warriors and master of quick raids, who also developed powerful composite bows, lassos, and early siege weaponry. The Huns were used as a synonym for Germans in order to emphasize the brutality. However, the term originated when the German Emperor Wilhelm II gave a speech to his troops on the 27th of July in 1900 before they embarked to China. The refusal to take prisoners was clear breach of the laws and the customs that were adopted with the First Hague Convention. Maybe it's Hague.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time.
Oops.
When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator.
Beautiful water.
Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight.
Nothing to inspect, it looks like.
The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Oh, there it is. Dagon was written. Dagon? I don't know. In July 1917, it was first published in 1990 in the Vagrant, an amateur magazine focused on the supernatural. The story is the first of his stories that included an element from the Cthulhu mythos. A pagan cult worshipped the Dagon letter appears in the shadow over Innsmouth, one of Lovecraft's most popular works. Sorry, I'm not reading all this. I just not that great at reading, so I'll read what little I can.
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know. For my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Dagon seemed to be inspired by Fishhead, a short novel by Ivan Tov, but unnatural affiliates between a hybrid idiot and a strange fish of an isolated lake. And Lovecraft's dream about a strange island emerged from the ocean, and him crawling in the ooze that covered the surface.
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
Volcanic eruptions sometimes result in the creation of islands. Most of them are transcendent and erode after some time, but some provide permanent.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water, preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
Interesting.
That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined. Ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easy footholds for a descent, whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself. But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express.
We're all alone. A very beautiful looking game.
For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely.
Yeah, there's not much.
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything. consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound.
Contains many themes with storytelling methods that Lovecraft later developed into his book, telling the story through carvings at the Mountain of Madness in the Nameless City, journals and character notes, the Shadow of Time and the Haunter of the Dark, islands emerging from the ocean, the Call of Cthulhu, or mythological beings and deities based on real events and mythology, Vigo in the Whisper of Darkness. It's also considered the origins of the popular Cthulhu mythos. God, I can't speak today. Some of Lovecraft's other stories also conclude in a manner similar to Dagon, but let's skip the details in order not to spoil the ending.
Plainly visible across the intervening water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters. Loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds.
Oh shit.
I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the sloping cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little.
Oh no, I'm really bad at scary things.
I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest notes. When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing. Nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
Lovecraft considered himself an atheist and absolute materialist, which he attributed partly to his early childhood interest in astronomy and science in general. In his own words, "I am indeed an absolute materialist so far as actual belief goes, with not a shred of conceit in any form of supernaturalism, religion, spiritualism, transcendentalism, metaphysicism, metaphysics, or immortality." That's chilling. Lovecraft was a prominent figure in the world of amateur journalists in 1950. He started publishing his own journal called The Conservative, which included political and social commentary, poetry, short stories, and literary criticism written by him and other authors.
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
Dagon, called Dagan, was the main deity of the Philistines worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. In Hebrew, the word Dagon was a common noun for grain. The ruler of Akkad, Mesopotamia, chose him as the patron saint of their war conflict. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in the Assyrian poem and an underworld prison warden in one of the Babylonian texts. He is often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to wrong interpretation of his name, as the Hebrew word dag means fish. Dagon is an underwater deity ruling over the deep, a humanoid race with fish traits that resides in the ocean. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Historic Order of the Dagon, or Dagon. Interesting room. I'm not going to read that, it's too small of a text.
But soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
Necronomicon! August Delirith was an American writer and anthologist. He also befriended Lovecraft and published many of his works in the company of the Arkham House, although he greatly contributed to the popularization of the author's work after his death. He is surrounded by numerous controversies. One of his most questionable decisions involved introducing the good and evil doctrine. Derleth was a devout Catholic to the Cthulhu mythos. Oh, he was a devout Catholic. He doctrine to the Cthulhu mythos, which were contrasted with Lovecraft's view of the world and his approach to cosmic horror. As a result, the author's work are often misunderstood and misrepresented in today's culture. It is worth noting that Lovecraft was never really interested in creating the mythos, and termed the Cthulhu myth was coined by Derleth after the author left the mortal plane. Yeah, I don't know if we'll go into this more, but that was the thing that I had to try and comprehend as a young adult, was the Cthulhu mythos. Was the idea of this big cosmic mortal being is scary. Yeah, that's great. But the idea is Cthulhu isn't this giant squid monster. The idea is, at least in my comprehending and understanding of it, was Cthulhu itself was the idea, or that feeling, the idea of the Cthulhu, or of Cthulhu, was not some being, but it was that absence of knowledge. It was that fear of the unknown. That's what the Cthulhu, or what Cthulhu was. But that was just my understanding of it. that flipped really fast. I like Lovecraft. I think I need to read more of his works, but it's truly interesting and makes you think.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having...
Lovecraft on tobacco and alcohol. Lovecraft hated tobacco, even though he used to smoke when he was 12. In order to look and feel like an adult, a correspondence with his friend Reinhardt, he claims that he quit as soon as he started wearing long pants. He also had a very strong opinion about alcohol, as evident in his letter to Delia Brown. As for the matter of drinking, I have never tasted intoxicating liquor, never intend to, having a strong aesthetic disgust at anything which blunts or coarsens the delicate natural equipoise of the evolved human intellect and imagination. Drinking excites my personal repugnance, hence I do not drink. Let the herd do what they will. I'd rather in favor of prohibition, the prohibition of one antisocial force as well as any other. Huh, I didn't know that.
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat, after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand!
Ah, shit.
The window! The window!
That was quaint. I liked it. Thanks for watching.